Our we are very grateful to be hosting Dr. Cynthia Scott to our webinar today, Thriving Through Change, hosted by HRDQ. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Please stay tuned at the conclusion of the broadcast for an exclusive offer. Before we begin, please note that there is a question and answer window located at the upper right corner of your screen. You may use this button during the webinar to submit questions. We will either answer your questions as we receive them if we have time, or by email after the session. My name is Lana Dow, and I will moderate today's webinar. I am in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. It's my privilege to introduce to you today our presenter, Cynthia Scott. Cynthia is an author, consultant, and core faculty at the MBA program in Sustainable Leadership at the Presidio Graduate School in San Francisco. Her expertise includes strategy implementation, leadership development, design thinking, and employee engagement. A founding principal of ChangeWorks Global, Dr. Cynthia Scott is a recognized leader with more than 25 years of experience. She's the author of numerous books, including Rekindling Commitment and Take This Work and Love It. And her work has been featured in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Stanford Business School Newsletter, and Worthwhile Magazine. Dr. Scott's clients include Blue Shield of California, Benjamin Moore, Charles Schwab, Kaiser Permanente, AT&T, the Internal Revenue Service, Estee Lauder, and National Semiconductor, just to name a few. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Cynthia.
Welcome, Lana. I am so pleased to be here. I actually enjoyed the part about you being in change, and it's been fun to be kind of your back behind the scenes consultant to looking at how HRDQ is going through these changes. I've really spent my career assisting leaders, teams, and organizations design and implement change. And in my career, I've had a lot of opportunity to help people figure out what is going on and how to do it better. So I am actually pleased to be working with you on this, and also challenged all the time by my students who are looking at how to make changes in economic, social, environmental, and cultural models and behavior. So the kinds of things we're going to do today really focus on the ability to thrive during change, because I like to say it's not going away, we just have to get better at it. So let's start with a simple truth, and I'm trying to advance my slides, but they're not advancing. Can you help me, Lana? There we are, the simple truth. This simple truth has come from lots of experience, and as an anthropologist, I go back to my first anthropology professor, and he asked us to basically disrupt a pattern in people's mazeways. So what I did is ask people in the dorm to use a different toilet and a different shower in the dorm bathroom. Now, you may say that that is not a big deal, but what's very interesting is we are animals of habit, and people get a lot of ownership. They like their patterns, they like their habits, they like their mazeways. So I learned about organizational change when I started my anthropology program, and have used a lot of that background to help me shape some of the things that we're going to be doing in this session today. I'm trying to advance again. You want to help me, Lana? Looks like the advances. Okay. Because basically, I think leadership, actually, I just finished a new book on leadership for sustainability and change, and the #1 opportunity for learning is really the ability to lead, manage, and create change in yourself and others. And shifting behavior is really about helping people let go of their patterns that they feel comfortable with. And I started this a long time ago in public health. We learned how to disrupt people's patterns when they needed to learn how to use seat belts or car seats for their children, because those were not patterns that people usually had. So if you understand the predictable path of change, you can help things go smoother and better. Let's take the next slide and look at today's focus. We're going to do 4 things, and I've basically pulled out my favorite pieces. And they're actually all in the HRDQ Managing the Change Curve toolkit, but I want to talk you through them today. They're all connected, and they will help you be a better change agent. First thing we're going to do is understand how the brain works and how it responds to change. We're not going to be neuroscientists, but we're going to dig in a little bit and just understand some of the things about why we do what we do. Secondly, we're going to look at ways to reduce threat and increase resilience. And as we've talked earlier, change really threatens people and it threatens the brain. So we're going to learn how to buffer that. And doesn't mean we're not going to keep moving with the changes. Thirdly, we're going to identify a predictable path of responding to change. So you'll be able to see it both in an individual's behavior, in a team's behavior, and at the meta-organizational level. And also learn how to guide and move through each of those phases. And lastly, we're going to look at how do you lead teams and how do you deal with resisting and change it into performing. So let's start with our brains. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to do an exercise that I often do with workshops with very large groups. So let's go to the next slide. And sometimes I actually have people do this, but I'm just going to ask you to imagine this. But even imagining it will provoke some brain responses. Let me imagine that I'm asking you right now to stand up, from your desk, from your chair, whatever. You could be driving, and change seats, move someplace else, and, oh, by the way, take everything with you. Now, this will predictably cause some disruption. And if I'm doing it with 800 people in the room, it does cause disruption because everyone has gotten very comfortable with where they are. They put their coffee down, they've got their things all arranged, they've, sited themselves where they want to be. What happens if I just didn't say change seats, but I said change your job, change the geographical location, change your boss, change houses? So as we deepen that kind of change, we deepen the disruption. So let me ask you how you're reacting to this. Let's go to the next slide. What were some of the reactions you had? Let's have a couple things in the chat window. You want to just let us know what. My guess is some of you said, I don't have to do that. This is just a webinar. I don't have to really pay attention. Or I don't like this. Who is she to tell me what to do? Does anybody else?
We have some people responding here.
Good.
Cynthia.
I can't see them, so
yeah, I'll let you know here. My heart rate went up just thinking about it. One person said. I laugh because when we do this in our classes, they usually throw a fit.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, this is, and what happens, so your body, in some ways, your heart rate, that's good to notice that inside your body something is happening. They throw a fit because it's arbitrary. They feel kind of, why are you playing with them? They just got ready to work. So let's go, basically what I've done is I've disturbed your lizard brain and all the pathways of comfort that people have established for themselves. And as you said, I don't even have to have you physically do this. Just thinking about it is enough to elicit a reaction. Like the person said, their heart rate went up just thinking about it. So let's go to the next slide. And I know a number of you really understand a lot about how the brain works, so I'm going to be very, very quick with this section. But what I'm always struck by is our brains are old, and they have done this and evolved for a long time. And our brains, because of that, they have only so much processing power. So they like habits. They like things that are repeatable, or if they were emotionally charged, if you had a big, scary kind of experience, they will hard code those behaviors and push them into long-term memory. So that's why you have such long ago memories. If you were afraid of dogs, the dog charge of memory will keep coming back and coming back. So basically, and I'm always struck with this, having worked in my earlier days with people who had strokes, we think it's very easy just to walk. And what happens is if you have to go back to the part of your brain that says pick up the left foot, pick up the right foot again and again, a lot of the unconscious things are just hardwired and we don't have to think about them. So our brain is very efficient and it allows us to conserve energy and save the energy for things that we really need to be thinking and responding to. Let's go to the next slide. Can we go to the, there we go. Okay. Basically, a way to think about this is in a very easy to remember way. Basically, the brain is wired to avoid sticks and seek carrots. And basically sticks are, we are teeny tiny animals and we have to get out of the way of predators, hazards, and now social aggression and pain of physical and emotional experiences. So this is why the little hairs go up on the back of my neck when I ride the train home late at night. It's like there's nobody really scary there, but I'm on alert and I don't know what's going to happen. The carrots are the things that keep us going. Food, sex, shelter, social support, pleasure, both physical and emotional. And we're always between the sticks and the carrots. Basically, sticks are usually urgent and must be paid attention to, while carrots you can kind of gaze and gather. That's the hunter-gatherer kind of pulling together experiences. Basically, sticks determine mortality. If you don't avoid the sticks today, you will have no carrots tomorrow. So let's have an appreciation and an acknowledgement that our brain has figured out how to allocate energy and attention and keep us in our small selves alive in a very challenging world. Let's go to the next slide. And this is a very simple slide of the brain. And I just want to call attention to the brain stem is that, you know, the part of the brain that takes care of all the automatic behaviors. You don't have to think every time, breathe in, breathe out. You don't have to think heartbeat, heartbeat. Your brain stem does that stuff. And when that goes away, then you don't live anymore. So the brain stem is very important for basic survival. Then our brain developed the whole limbic system. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but basically in the limbic system, you have a lot of the, what we've talked about, the carrots and the sticks, the fight or flight, basically cat and dog, you know, revenge, you know, all that kind of mixture of what do we do with what is happening to us. And the prefrontal cortex is that part at the front that really deals with executive function, not having to do with hierarchy, but things that have to do with mediating decisions, process, regulating, and synthesizing. And any of you who have gone through raising teenagers, this explains teenagers because the prefrontal cortex does not get fully formed until they're about 25. so understand that teenagers have a lot of limbic activity and hormonal changes going on with a limited prefrontal cortex. So just have empathy for your teenagers. Let's go and take what we know then about the brain, and then let's look at the lizard brain, which is that limbic system, the amygdala. Let's go to the next slide. Basically, and I call it the lizard brain because it's just easier, it gives you a way to remember it. It's the physical part of your brain near the brainstem that mediates fear, rage, and reproductive drive. So all those towards and away, carrots and sticks kinds of things. And basically, the chicken crossed the road because the lizard brain told her to. And so this is the part where you have to understand that your lizard brain is much faster than the prefrontal cortex. So it will react. This is also, the good part is, this is where the mommy picks up the car, you know, off her kid. This is where your body goes into, adrenaline helps this, but your basic brain is saying, I'm going after, you know, I'm getting away from the sticks. So basically, now that we have ourselves in not out on the savannah with predators, we are riding the train home from work, the lizard isn't going to go away, and our job is to figure out how to quiet it, especially when it's related to change, because we're always making our brain upset by the changes. So let's go to the next slide. And as I was saying, basically your brain works at 1/20th of a second, and it makes the decisions in the lizard brain really fast. So that's why I work a lot with executives who all of a sudden will be doing behavior that they didn't really want to do and don't know where it came from. And this is this biological hardwiring. And it's unconscious, and it's often not known. So a lot of times the emotional literacy work that I do with executives is to help them understand what is going on in their brain so they can anticipate situations where this might go off. And again, as I said earlier, the brain reaches the conclusion in the lizard part faster than the prefrontal cortex. So this also, back to teenagers, it's like, why would you do that? You know, it's almost like because my lizard brain, you know, told me to do that. So let's go to the next slide. And basically, what helps the lizard become vigilant is these arousal patterns. And we've talked about it before, carrots, sticks, towards, and away. Hotspots are also patterns that are stored and tagged as dangerous. And this may explain why, if you were frightened by a dog when you were 3, you still see dogs, and your brain, even though you're in your 30s, your brain is still vigilant around dog because it's hardwired and it's stored there as dangerous. So we are animals of pattern and habit. And then let's go to the next slide. So what do we do with this lizard brain? What's interesting is when the lizard brain is activated, it reduces the amount of resources or physical attention that we can put on deciding things in the prefrontal cortex. So this is why you actually don't think as well when you are stressed and reacting. And when you try to suppress it, it only makes it worse because it takes a lot of energy to suppress it, and your body is still feeling that heart palpitation even though you're saying don't be afraid. So your prefrontal cortex is saying don't be afraid, your body is sweating and nervous. So how does this relate to change? Let's go to the next slide. Let's look at 5 ways to reduce threat and increase resilience. And let me talk about, let's go to the next slide. And most of the change that we're doing is really not at stick level. We're not poking people with sticks during change, but we are creating social threat. And social threat, because we're not being chased down on the savannah by by tigers anymore, but we are having social threat, and the social threat comes out in 5 ways. Let me go to the next slide, and I really want to credit David Rock. This is his model, the SCARF model, and my students use it a lot, and we say, oh, I've been scarfed, because what happens is when you are experiencing social threat, and the other thing is social threat works the same way as physical threat. So you will get sweaty. You will have heart palpitations, just like we did with the switching seats exercise. What causes social threat are 5 things. And these are threats to status, which is basically the pecking order. You know, how you relate to how you're perceived by others. How people compete with themselves rather than, actually what's very interesting is high competition really decreases performance. It does not increase it. So people who rely on competitions and games and things like that often are having unintended consequences because they are making some people winners and some people losers. It's better when you have people compete with themselves from an intrinsic part of their own drivers. And the certainty, anytime you're doing a change, you are destroying people's certainty. People love predictive. They love to know where's their desk, what's their work, where's the cafeteria. My rule of thumb is if you really want to make people crazy, change the parking lot, the cafeteria, and the bathrooms at the same time you're doing the implementation of whatever technology or process change. So people get really upset with lack of certainty. And labeling can help people understand this. I use a lot of maps, I use a lot of diagrams, I use a lot of ways of saying we are here and we're going there. Even if it's 4 circles, it creates a calmness in the brain that says I am not lost and I will get through this. The autonomy is about having choices and being able to have a say in the future. And this may not be that they get to say everything, but give people the choice that they have. Relatedness has to do with, you know, how you are connected to your group. Who do you eat lunch with? I just worked with an organization that got reorged, and now they had a new boss. And so everyone is trying to figure out where are they in pecking order? What is the status? What does this mean? What does this mean for their future? They had conferences they were going to attend, and do they still get to make these choices? The relatedness is basically about, because the brain actually sees everyone as a foe at first, because that's how we're wired, because we had to make decisions very quickly. Well, your brain is on overdrive because you walk through the lobby and you see all these people and you're almost feeling threat just because you may know them or not know them, but your brain is perceiving foe instead of friend. So the more that people have a sense of relatedness and connectedness, the better they do with change. Fairness is in itself rewarding, and the brain associates it with primary reward like food. So if people feel it is not fair, the decision was made in a way that did not take people's consideration, that doesn't mean everybody gets what they want, but they want to know that it was fair. So what David Rock has done has really been able to pull these out and show us a model for being able to identify what part of the change, what part of the social threat model that we are impinging on with the change. Let's go to the next one, because basically change puts people's brains in pain, and change equals uncertainty, and it causes people to feel threat. Let's go to the next one, because what I've learned to do is if you can't make it all better, you can buffer it. So what I do is, for example, if there's a change in status, like this team that just got the new boss, increase the relatedness, buffer it with something that buffer it with one of the other SCARF elements. And if you can't give people status, give them relatedness. Have an offsite. Have people remember all the good things that they did with each other. Show that it's happening to other groups the same way. It's not just happening to you. So balancing it out, and guaranteed, if you want to really make people upset, do something that hits all of the SCARF areas, like saying English is now our global language. It's asked to help an organization implement that. And from a SCARF standpoint, status is affected because the people who are native speakers of English may be perceived as having higher status. The certainty is different because you came in under different recruitment rules. Your autonomy is you don't get to speak your own language anymore. You maybe be limited in your interaction with each other, which is relatedness, and it seems kind of arbitrary and unfair. So that's a way of using the SCARF model to really understand that most of what people's reaction is to change is based on social threat. Let's look at the third element and look at going to the next slide. And what I find is I started out a long time ago in the early days of change when people said, oh, we're going through a change and I don't know why people are so upset. And I started doing this exercise with people to find out what their experience was, because as a behavioral scientist and an anthropologist, I kind of go directly to the people and say, what's your experience? And in doing this with large groups over and over again, we were actually doing a large-scale transformation with a communications company, and they were closing sites, they were moving technology, they were doing everything that hit all the SCARF parts. So to begin to map this, and this is about 25 years ago, trying to figure out what's a path, because if there was a path, then basically you could tell people where they were, and if they knew where they were, they wouldn't feel lost. So let me take you through the same experience and exercise that I use all the time in my workshops. Let's go to the next one. So I'd like each of you to recall a personal experience of change. And I know this, first of all, this does not really work with young people because they haven't had enough change to have enough to choose from. So my guess is that all of you on this webinar have had enough experience with change. And the reason I say personal is it's something that affected you. And I realize that you have a number of these in your life, but I'm just asking you to choose one. And let's imagine that you had some kind of diary or Facebook postings or did something that gave you a way of looking back at this change. So what I'd like you to do, let's go to the next slide, is I'm going to ask you to record your thoughts and feelings on the change worksheet. And you can either do this by writing it down. Sometimes writing it down is very helpful because, again, it helps people get a sense of control and they see a sequence that they didn't see before. So let's go back to the beginning before this change happened. And I also want you to understand that some of you are thinking of a change that you initiated. And others of you are thinking of a change that you did not initiate. Both are very valid and important, and you will see how each of those creates a different path through the change. And it'll help us understand the difference between leaders' path through the change and everyone else. So what I'd like to do is ask you to go back to the time before the change happened. And let's go to the next slide because it basically has the worksheet. And so I'm going to say, before the change happened, what were your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions? What was it like to be you? And just make some notes. What were you thinking about? How would you be behaving? What would others have seen? And this is in relation to the one change that you've selected. So again, and you will not have to talk to anybody about this, so you can just keep it to yourself. This is before the change happened. And now I'd like to invite you to fast forward or flip through the pages or whatever in your mind and go to the time when the change is really happening. It's not just an idea, it's actually disrupting you. What's it like to be you? What are your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions? And now flip through or go back to remembering when it was over 51% of the way there. And I said 51% because it's more than halfway. And what's it like for you then, when it's more than halfway? What are your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions? And now, let's go to when the change was really done. It's completed. And you actually may have some feelings of, regret or wistfulness or, looking back at what has happened. So what are your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions? Alrighty, let's take a pause right here, knowing that you have recorded some things or at least thought it through. What I'd like to do is a quick poll, and I'm going to ask, Lana's going to help me kind of see how you answer this question. If we go to the next slide, what kind of change did you recall? And answer A, if it was a change, as we said, that you initiated, that you started, or a change that came from somewhere else, outside your control. So if you could just initially, was it an outside or an inside one?
Okay, 56%, 57% have voted. If you want to vote, go ahead and do it now. We'll get the...
And there are no right answers.
Okay, 68% have voted.
Okay, so that'll give us a good pattern. Lana, what
okay.
Do we have out there?
We have 36% said a change that you initiated, and 64% said a change that came from outside your control.
Yeah, that's actually I mean, my guess is that, and again, I didn't have I didn't give you any guidance on whether it was a personal or organizational change, but it had to have affected you personally. What's interesting is there's always a mix like this, and especially, and this is the difference between what happens to people who are often leading the change. They feel like they've initiated it, and they've often been planning the change and understanding and looking at the context, versus the people who all of a sudden hear about it and are woken up in full scarf mode. So in some ways, even if you had a lot of pressure and didn't like your circumstances, initiating the change makes you feel more activated. So let's look at the transition curve model and understand kind of what we know about change. Let's go to the next. And I usually create this not in a nicely graphically produced way like this. I usually do it very messy on the flip chart and I build it and I only label it at the end because I want to collect people's experiences. What was it like in the first phase? And that's what I ask people. And it was, if you initiated it, you often felt frustrated and stuck and wanted something else different, or you felt empowered and filled with, vision. If you heard about it from the outside and got scarfed, you often ignore it and not want it to happen at all and don't see it. This is the phase, and I've changed the wording here a little bit. I call it denying. I use ing on all the different phases because I think it's very important to, when you have a word like denial, like you are in denial, that means you are stuck. Denying means you are in transition. And you could be denying in the morning and not denying in the afternoon. So it implies change. So it makes for a bad model and bad English, but it makes for a good way of coaching people. So the denying is basically hardwired into our bodies. And because if we paid attention to everything, we would be overwhelmed by the amount of change. So I will say no one would get married or have a kid if they didn't have denying built in. So denying is very helpful, and it's not someplace you want to live forever, but you need to visit it occasionally. It's very helpful. The second phase, and maybe I'll go through the slides this way, but I want you to see this model. And let me say a couple more things before we move on. You'll notice that the curve goes down and up. And most people say, well, how long do I stay in each phase? And that's the hardest question to answer because basically some people move very quickly. Some people get stuck and need more support and coaching through the different phases. And you'll notice that you come out with a higher level of capacity and capability as you come through a change process. Now, a number of my clients were coming through their first change process, and this is one of the things I've seen over the years. When we really thought we were going to have jobs forever and companies never changed, the first one was a big ripper, like the divestiture of AT&T or closing plants at IBM or, just imagine going from, 4-inch wafers to a whole other level of technology. What I see now is that people have much more fluidity of being able to move through this process and have gained kind of a momentum and a resilience in being able to understand that it's a process. Second thing is, it also, I find some people, younger people, are sometimes more hesitant to change because they've just gotten a sense of capability. They're young in their careers and they really want that sense of mastery. Whereas people who've been through this a lot can move sometimes more fluidly with the amount of support that helps them learn and master the new things. So let's go through the next slides rather quickly. I'm just going to highlight some of the behaviors. because again, the behaviors are predictable, and you can also see these behaviors in a person, you can see them in a team, and you can see them at the organizational level. So I deal a lot with sustainability change, and we have a whole bunch of people in organizations that just don't think any of this is going to affect them. So we have a lot of denying, and when you ask them to start reporting their CSR reports, they go, or they forget to do it, or they don't pay attention, or they miss the deadline, or you know. And the other one that I find often is that they do the old work much better. So you'll often have a very interesting burst of productivity with the old way. So denying, again, is built in and is predictable and necessary, and it helps us from being overwhelmed by all the changes. Let's go to the next slide. And what's interesting about this is this says, you know, you're a butterfly now, but you still think you are a caterpillar. And what happens is I see a lot of people who have moved on the outside with the change, but they haven't moved on the inside. So it's helping people to understand why the denying is still going on. And it's usually about heading into the second phase, which is the resisting. And let's go to the next phase. Resisting is where the change goes from being imagined to being actually physically happening. So it's where they start the road work on the freeway, and it's fine that they're improving the freeway, but when you're stuck in traffic and all your traffic patterns are off, the resisting comes up, and people go, I hate this. I don't like this change. You know, this is not what I wanted. I'm exhausted. You know, I can't get anything done. And it's a combination of being upset on the outside, grumpy, or becoming, I won't do this. You know, I'm just not going to deal with this. So complaining, blaming, being very grumpy. So a person can have this, a whole team can have this, and an organization can have this. I watch my student teams go through this a lot when they actually go from they have a great project and now they have to actually do it with the client. And so the resisting is true and normal and to be expected, because what we're doing is you're disturbing the lizard brain, and the lizard does not like that, and it wants to have things the way it wants. It wants all the scarf things to be the same. Let's go to the next one. The third phase is when you've gone over to the 51%. And the reason I say that is I actually, when I asked people to do that in large groups, they said things like, oh, I can park in the garage and not feel upset anymore. Or I start singing in the shower again. Or for some people, I started eating again. Or for some people, I stopped eating everything. So the shift into exploration is usually a shift from the left-hand two pieces have to do with danger, back to the sticks experience, and then over to the right, it's more towards carrots. It's more towards possibilities. And exploring is just a nice word for chaos, basically, because this is when all kinds of new things become possible and you're very interested in them. And if you're a group, you want to do lots of things. And this is in a divorce, this is where you want to date everyone. This is the what is out there, vision of possibility. And what happens is people need a way of focusing and a way to say no to certain things and reduce the options. So this is where you start a task team, a small group of people that are moving fast. So let's go to the next one. And this is the end. And again, when I first developed the change curve or the transition curve, I was using Kubler-Ross was my model because I was a social scientist. And basically, I found that, you know, you couldn't say death happens at the end because people being laid off are not dying. They may feel like they're dying. But it's basically they've come to a new level of commitment. And they're back in control again. They've got some habits and patterns that feel comfortable. They know where to park in the garage. They understand the cafeteria again. They're beginning to feel some kind of capability with their skills. And this is a time when they're actually looking ahead to the next change. They're ready to see out and see more possibilities. But at the same time, some of you may feel wistful and kind of nostalgic for how it used to be. So there's a push-pull that happens in committing, and it may take a while to establish that kind of sense of buoyancy and resilience to take on the next change. One of the mistakes that people make, especially if they are doing a large-scale change, is they want everyone to get over it real quickly, and they don't understand why people need time. Let's go to the next slide because I think it helps explain. And I just call this the zigzag because people can say, oh, you know, I'm denying, but then I'm resisting, I'm angry, but then I'm back in denial. I go up and down, back and forth, and up and down, back and forth. So I just drew this so that people wouldn't feel crazy. So they understand that in one meeting they can be denying, and the next meeting they're just grumpy and, you know, putting in all their ideas of why it won't work. So it's common to feel this back and forth. So again, that's why they're using the ing, because you're not just in denial, you are denying, and then you're resisting, and then you're exploring. And you can move through this in 1 hour. You can move through this in 1 day. And if you have to give up, you know, a technology that you helped pioneer, it may take you a little longer. Let's go to the next one because there's a leadership trap in here, and I mentioned this before. And if you think of the bottom 2 quadrants, the resisting and exploring, this is where there's often a disconnect with leaders because they have often been in the planning phases. They've been working out the details. They've been doing the deal, figuring out how to make this strategic shift. They've been at offsites. They've had consultants. They've had a lot of time. And what happens is they come back and they tell the organization this is where we're going. So they have actually, the leaders have gotten to move through the 4 quadrants on these offsites. They actually, you know, have to wake up because if they don't wake up, they don't keep their role. They often grumble a lot on the offsite, but then they break through and kind of come to the exploration and commitment, and then they are ready to lead. Well, what happens is they're already in commitment, and they turn around and say, what's the matter with you guys? I just announced this change. Why don't you get with it? And what happens is they really want people to get over it. And they really do not want to have the experience of leading through the bottom 2 quadrants. They don't want to hear people's grumpiness, and they don't want to deal with the chaos. So this is a leadership trap, and I call it the Tarzan because I kept working with so many senior teams that just, can't they get over it? What's the matter with them? And so it's like Tarzan swinging across and, whoops, hits the wall and basically comes back down. And you as a person or your organization or your team is where you're behaving, not where your words are. So if your words are in commitment, but everyone's grumpy and not showing up and not getting things done, you are in resisting. So you are where your behavior is, not where your words are. So this is a trap that leaders often, and the other thing is, frankly, it's normal because leaders are supposed to be 1 or 2 transition curves ahead of their organization. That's what they're hired to do, to create strategy and vision. So let's go to the next slide. And this is some ways to help yourself, because if you don't help yourself first, you have to put on the mask first before you help others. So when you're in denying, you know, begin to say, what's changing? Where did this come from? What am I not paying attention to? What do I not want to look at? And then feeling you're resisting, you know, I'm just really grumpy today. What am I losing? Because resisting is all about loss. Resisting is always about loss of status, autonomy, all the scarf stuff is being upset. And it's very important to help people acknowledge that and move on. In the exploring, it's where do I begin to see opportunity? Where are the things that I couldn't see before? And committing is taking action on things you can control and letting go of the stuff you can't, and being willing to try stuff and iterate and you know, actually behave in a way that maybe your feelings haven't caught up, but you're in that transition. We've got 5 more minutes, and I'd like to really focus on the last part about how to lead teams. And I'm going to go through this. You have all these handouts, so let's go to the next one. So let's go to the next one. And this is just basically the leadership piece. When you are faced with denying in yourself or your team or a large group, you basically need to wake people up. You need to create a map, communicate the vision. They don't want to hear it sometimes, but you need to say it over and over again. You need to draw a picture, you need to take people on a field trip, you need to go see the new way, look at the new stuff, you know, whatever it is. Go listen to customers. So this is where you have to quickly wake people up. The second slide, basically, in resisting, this is where people are experiencing the loss. And you do a lot of listening. You don't defend you say, that's really hard. You know, help them identify what they're losing. One of the things we did with one of the plant closures is we actually made a huge wall by the cafeteria and let people graffiti on the wall, all kinds of upsetness. Because the other thing, by handling it with large groups, it moves itself. One of the traps in resisting is to listen to each person one-on-one, and you'll exhaust yourself. Help the group. So I'm really like as large a possible mechanism to do this large group listening. And that comes to the next slide, because all of you are basically tomato suit wearers. And I used to have a red suit that I used to use a lot when I facilitated these sessions, because you don't need to fix it. You just need to let people get it out. And I recommend that you do it with as large a group as possible, as quickly as possible, because it will accomplish the waking up and the letting it out. My favorite one was with IRS, people being redistricted. 800 people in the room with the senior commissioner at max mix tables of people just complaining and basically telling us why this wasn't going to work. So so it's possible to do that more quickly. So let's do the next slide of exploring. And the main thing you do with exploring is get people focused, get them onto task teams, get them with 4 things they're doing rather than 26 things. Let's go to the next one on committing. And the most important part about when people have come to this phase is that you acknowledge and reward. And this doesn't mean hats, cups, and T-shirts. You maybe do some kind of celebration, some kind of acknowledgement. So the way to summarize this is the next slide, and basically says when they're in denying, wake them up, and when they're resisting, listen to them, And exploring is give them possibilities but help them focus, and committing is implement and look ahead at the next one. So very quickly, as we summarize, where do you start? Let's go to the next slide. When you're leading a change, you must take care of the people in exploring first. The group that has moved into exploring needs to be given something to do, because if they aren't, and you're spending all your time with people in denying and resisting, they will leave the organization. Your talent will move. And so you need to get a structure in place for the people that are exploring. Then you need to go back and help wake up the people. And remember that what you see may not be what they see. So understand that their sense of certainty and autonomy and status may be very different than what you have in your role. And then you go to the people who are just grumpy and can't seem to move. And at a certain point, I had a boss that used to say, the dogs may bark, but the caravan moves on. And at a certain point, you just have to move and say, we're not going to do this anymore. So as we look at kind of summarizing, and my last one is when to do training. Let's go to the next slide. When to do training is when people have gotten to the exploring stage. Do not do training when they're denying, because they won't show up. Do not do training when, and this is about skill-based, competency-based, learning new things. Don't do it when they're resisting, because they will just eat the trainer alive and you'll have a bad day. Wait until they're there. So don't spend any money. Spend your time and effort getting them awake and moving. So what I've tried to do in this session today is really take you through 4 things. The 4 things were, we explored how the brain works, and we understood the lizard brain. We looked at SCARF, the 5 ways to reduce threat and increase resilience. And we looked at a predictable path, which is the change curve and the managing the change curve training packet. And how do you lead from resisting to performing? So what I've really enjoyed today is being able to take my favorite things that have worked in multiple situations with multiple audiences over the years, and share them with you today. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to hearing more questions from you and being part of your learning community at HRDQ.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. This has been an amazing presentation. I really want to say, wow, very good. The thank yous are coming in, and everyone is excited about what has been presented, so we will be sharing more about that. We don't have any time for questions today, but you can go ahead and put them in your question box, as usual, and we will get those answered for you by email. But before we go, I wanted to let you know that we are offering a really great deal on Mastering the Change Curve, which is this material at HRDQ. Mastering the Change Curve is a research-based soft skills assessment that identifies which change phase the individual is currently experiencing with subscores for each of the dimensions. The facilitator set includes tools to lead a meaningful 2-hour training session, including background information, step-by-step workshop guidelines, the 4 phase changes, and the change curve model, along with optional activities, alternative training designs, and a professional Microsoft PowerPoint presentation to go with it. And trainer certification is not required to administer or facilitate Mastering the Change Curve. For joining us today, you can receive 65% off the regular price. So as you can see there, normally $180, now only $59. Use coupon code webinar MCC, Mastering the Change Curve, webinar MCC, and the number 2 at the shopping cart at hrdqstore.com, and this is available until the end of the month, May 31st. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for being with us today.
Very glad to do it. See you soon.
Thank you.
Okay,
everyone,
bye-bye.
have a good day. Bye-bye.